Welcome to part one of working with the Redrum drum computer in Reason. Let's go ahead and just get started. I'll drag Redrum into the rack and I'll hit F3 to close the browser. So Redrum is a pattern-based drum machine and it has 10 separate drum channels which you can have different sounds in each one. The drum sounds are saved as kit patches and can be loaded and saved using the patch browser, which is down here in the bottom left corner. So you basically have three main areas here in Redrum. You've got your 10 different channels on the top, then you've got your browse area here for loading different drum kit patches, and then you've got your pattern-based sequencer here below the channels. When you drag a Redrum into the rack, it automatically defaults to a disco kit here. In order to choose a different kit, you can click on the Browse Patch button. This will then open the browser and it will default to the Redrum drum kits. Then here you have folders that you can just double click and you've got different kits within each folder. At the very bottom, you've got several kits that aren't contained in the folder. You can also just drag over a kit and load that way. You can also use the down and up arrows. So if I click down, we then load the house kit, which corresponds to these here. If I click down again, we've got the rock kit. So if I go into the R&B kits and if I double click, we then load that. And again, if I come to the down arrow, we then go down sequentially within this folder. If you, and actually I'm going to go step up one here, load this default kit back in. If you, for instance, have the browser closed, you do have the option of clicking on the name display here. This will then show whatever is in that folder, or these are those kits that are not contained within the folder. And you can then choose from here without having to open up your browser or click on the arrow keys here. You can then just see which one you'd like to choose within that folder, or in our instance, those loose kits. So you can also load different drum patches or samples. Each of the 10 channels has a browse folder here for browsing the samples. So if we click this, then the browser will open up, and in this case, since we're clicking on this folder, it will default to the samples contained within the folder disco, because that's the kit that we have. So then you can choose from any of these samples. Again, you can double click, you can drag over. You can also use the arrow keys here to go up or down. And I'll F3 and close the browser. Another feature here with working with sounds or samples is you can sample your own drum sound here. This is the sample button. You just click on that, and I actually don't have an audio interface connected, so I can't actually do the sample and show you that, but you would just click that and then hit stop once you've recorded your sample. Alternatively, you can click and hold, and then once you release your mouse click, it will then stop. So I'm going to click on the display here and I'll down arrow and come back up just so we can load our default sound back into this first channel because when we sampled, it replaced it with nothingness because I didn't record any audio. So as with the name display here in the kit browsing area, you can also click on the name display here and choose from the different samples contained within that disco folder as well. Also, you can see that Redrum comes up with a default name here on the side, but you can also double click that and call that kit whatever you'd like to help you identify it better. Also worth mentioning, there is a 12-second limit if you're going to sample your own sound, so anything beyond that will be truncated. To select a channel for to start programming a pattern in for the sound, you just want to be sure that the select button is highlighted. So by clicking on select, you are then choosing that channel and that sound to then choose a cell here or a step to add that sound into the pattern. Let's start with channel 1 here. This has a bass drum. So if you want to add that sound to your pattern, you would just then click. I'll choose 1, 7, and 11. And actually, I'm going to deselect these. So you can run this the redrum by pressing the spacebar, and you can see that run highlights becomes illuminated, and then you've got a red LED that goes along the 16 different steps to show you that it's playing back. You can see we're playing back in our sequencer. I'll hit the spacebar to stop, and you can also hit run, and this will run the patterns in Redrum without playing back your song. So I'll click run to stop. And so let's go ahead and start programming a drum pattern in here. We've got number 1 selected. So I'll choose 1, 7, and 11. And we just played this back and we didn't have any audio. So now let's hit run and see what we've got. Okay, so if I want to add a snare, then I want to be sure that I click select down at the bottom of that channel, and I'll choose 5 and 13. Now I'll add a hi-hat in, and I'll put that on 1, actually 5, 9, and 13. Okay, and so if you want to make any edits, just be sure that you go and choose the particular channel or sound that you'd like to edit. So now we're on our snare, and you can see that's on 5 and 13. Our bass drum, 1, 7, and 11. One other thing to make note of is that if you've got programming on lots of different channels here, you're only going to have a visual representation of whichever one you have selected here. So if you get lost and you're not sure which ones have programming, when you play back, just take note here that these audition or trigger buttons will light up, showing you at which cell or step is activated. So this is also how you can audition your sounds by using that trigger button. You can also trigger each channel or drum sound using your MIDI controller. And I also do not have a MIDI controller connected at this time, so I'll bring up my on-screen keys by hitting F4. And you just want to be sure these sounds start at C1. So I've got C1 selected here for the octave. And I'll start on key A here on my keyboard. I'll press that, and you can see we're then triggering that channel 1. W is 2, and so on. So I'll F4 and close those on-screen keys. Moving on here, each channel has its own level control, and that can be found here. So you can adjust individual levels. And in the upper left-hand corner, you've got your master level, which is global for all channels. When you are adjusting these, one thing to note is that if you'd like to get these back to their default positions, you can hold down Control on your keyboard and click, and it will return that to its original position. So if I turn that all the way up and hold Control, click, you see we then come back. If I turn this level all the way up, hold Control and click, then it returns to its default position. Also, this is how quickly it adjusts when I just move it with my mouse. If you'd like more precise control, you can hold down Shift on your keyboard, and then you'll have a finer control of all of these dials within Redrum. I'll Control click to return that to where it was. So we've created a basic beat here with using 16 steps here. But if you'd like to create something that's longer, you do have that option. And in order to do that, you would use this area here. These up and down arrows control how many steps are going to be available to you. And by default, you start at 16. But you can raise this up all the way to 64 is the maximum. And in order to add programming to those other steps, you would then use this switch here. You see it's on 1 through 16, which is where we've added our information. You then can move this up to add programming to 17 through 32, 33 through 48, and up to 64. And so we'll just move this back down to 1 through 16, which is where we have our information. One other area to note in this pattern sequencing area is that you can control the dynamics of your drum samples by using this dynamic switch here. By default, it's on medium, so whichever cells or steps you click on and program in, it's going to default to medium. So if you'd like to vary that information though, let's go ahead and play back. I'll just hit run. And okay. So this is good that this mistake happened. Actually, we were getting the silence because I never returned the steps here back to 16, and it was playing through to those blank steps that we didn't add anything to. So I'm just gonna, besides using these arrow keys, you can click in the window here and just drag down. So let's just put that back to 16, and let's try this again. So I'm going to alter the dynamics of the hi-hat here, and I will choose hard, and you just click on the one that you want to alter, and I'll change 1, 9, then I'll come to soft and I'll put that on 5. And that is how you adjust the dynamics of your sounds. So I'll just change this back to medium, select the ones I'd like to change back, and now we're back to how we originally began. Another feature in the sequencer area is flam, and you can add this to any of your sounds. For our situation, I'm just going to use the snare drum. So let's go ahead and to add this, you have two different ways. You can click, each step has a red LED above it. So you can add the flam by just clicking the LED, and that will then make it active. You can also click on the flam LED here, and when you add any future notes in here or drum sounds, it will then be added automatically. You can see these are lighting up as I click. Okay, whereas if I have the flam edit turned off, we don't get that flam automatically added. So let's go ahead and play back. And I'm just going to select the LED to add that flam. And then you can adjust the delay timing with this dial. To the left is less delay, to the right you're going to introduce more delay. Okay, and that's how you add flam. One other thing is you can also click and drag if you'd like to add flam to a group of steps, one after the other, and just click and drag to remove. So now that we've got our pattern how we'd like it, and you want to add it to your track in the sequencer, the way that you would do that is I'm going to hit F6 and F7 so that we can see both our rack and the sequencer. And here Reason already created that sequencer track for the redrum, and all you have to do is just select the pattern that you would like to copy to the sequencer, and that will be inserted in between wherever you have your loop locator set. So we have pattern 1. I'll right click on redrum and come down to the bottom, copy pattern to track, and it then will add that pattern to our sequencer. So if I were to hit the spacebar, both the redrum and this pattern that I've copied to the track will play at the same time. Well, our song position pointer is way out here and our information is here, so I'll just hit 1 to bring the song position pointer to our left locator and play back again. Now you'll hear the difference that they are both playing. You get kind of a distorted sound. So if you'd like to prevent that, what you would need to do is click on this Enable Pattern section and turn that off. Now we're just hearing what we have copied to the sequencer. Okay, and then also one other thing that I wanted to mention here, there's a high quality interpolation button here. if this is selected, you're just going to have higher quality sounds. But it's on by default when you bring Redrum into the rack. But just keep in mind that this is going to use more processing power in your computer. When this came out, computers were a lot slower. So in today's times, this probably wouldn't be much of an issue. But just keep in mind, if you're on a slower computer and you're trying to save processing power, you can turn off that high quality. Then also, so we've got a really basic pattern here, but say you'd like to switch it up and create some more variation. Beyond adding the extra steps here on up to 64 like we've covered, you also have the option to, you've got 8 different patterns that you can program in. You see these are all blank here because we haven't added anything. But so you could say select 2 and then just create something completely different. And then once you've created something different, you can move your loop locators and then be sure that that pattern is selected. Right click and come down to copy pattern to track and add that in that way. Besides putting in completely new steps, you can also, if you're working on one song, you could just right click on Redrum, copy the initial pattern that you created, select pattern 2, right click, and paste that pattern. So now you've got a duplicate of what was on pattern 1 on pattern 2. You can then use that as a base to make adjustments so that they're going to be more in line with one another. Also to save you a few steps in programming. So you can do that with 3. We could paste that pattern into there, and so on up to 8. And you've got 4 different banks here. So you've got tons of patterns that you can create here. And you see these are all blank because we haven't added anything to them. So we'll come back to A, which is where our initial pattern is that we programmed. If you note, nothing's lit up here, and that's because we don't have a pattern selected. But if we come to pattern 3, which is what we copied, pattern 2 we copied, and pattern 1 is our original one. To get rid of patterns, you just select that one that you'd like to get rid of, right click on Redrum, and clear the pattern. So I'll select 2 and clear the pattern. And I'll just come back to 1. So I think we'll stop here for part 1, and in the next video I will go into more details on the controls contained within each channel. We'll take a look at some of the other features and functions in the sequencer. We'll also take a look at the back of Redrum and go over some of the cable connections here.